Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for my PowerShell for DBA beginners. This is my first time presenting at Summit, and while I was looking forward to doing it in person, I'm quite excited to do it virtually. Glad you're here also. I know with virtual it means that folks from around the world can be attending, so whatever time of day it is for you, thanks for being here. My name is Greg Moore. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I consider myself the chief problem solver at Green Mountain Software. Basically put, this means I like to solve problems. SQL problems, PowerShell problems, whatever it is. I'm an independent consultant and customers hire me to solve problems for them. Even though this is a recorded session, I am going to a few times ask for feedback, so please use the window to raise your hand, give me the feedback I'm looking for, and also please submit questions. Even though this is recorded, I may be able to answer the questions live during the recording by the interface, or I can save them to the end for the Q&A session at the end. I'm really looking forward to that, hoping that you'll stick around for that. That will be live, so that should be really good. And I do look forward for feedback. I do use the feedback to improve my presentation, so if you thought I did things great, let me know. If you thought I could improve things, also please let me know, because again, I want to improve this presentation for the next time I give it. This is the first time I'm giving it, so we should see how this works. So first thing, let's talk about what PASS has to offer. You may have seen this slide before. I'm going to highlight a few things. I am the group coordinator for the Albany, New York local user group. We have monthly meetings the second Monday of every month, starting at about 6 p.m. for the social, 6:30 for the actual presentation. These are now virtual. If you go to Meetup and look for CASUG, you'll find us. First, I want to know how many folks here have been to their local user group or members of the local user group, and then maybe the folks who are not local user group members, and maybe there's not one around you. If there's not, I highly recommend you start one. You can start with 4 or 5 folks and build up from there. It's a great way to exchange ideas, and now that things are done virtually, you don't have to do everything in person. You can attend user groups around the world. I've just attended one in Hampton Roads, Virginia. I presented at Denver, Colorado a few weeks ago. I presented across the world virtually. So local user groups, right now we're taking advantage of the virtual nature that COVID passes on to us. Sql Saturday. Sorry, that's a little covered up by my face, but I kind of wanted to give a little interaction to this demo here. Sql Saturdays are like one-day conferences. If you're not going to Sql Saturday, please go. And again, I'd love to see a show of hands of those who've been, those who have not. We just had Sql Saturday 1000 in Portland, Oregon. I attended that again virtually last night, joined a couple sessions. It was really great. So please take advantage of that. And it is free, unlike Summit. Smaller things. Hopefully once COVID is over, we'll get back to doing them in person again. But in the meantime, take advantage of the virtual nature. Virtual groups. These are a bit different than local user groups. These are always done virtually. Oftentimes, like Women in Technology, they have a session during lunchtime, at least East Coast time. They do have them recorded, but it is a great way to spend your lunch. Sit down, grab a sandwich, and listen to a presenter talk about a topic. And of course, PASS volunteers. Please get involved. Summit and all of PASS relies on volunteers like you, like myself, to present, to help moderate, or just help things going on in the background. So I highly recommend it. But enough about PASS. If you want more information, go to pass.org. Love to hear from you. So today we have a bunch of topics that we'll be talking about. Basically, our agenda is why PowerShell? We're DBAs. We use T-SQL. We're used to working in T-SQL. We use SQL Server Management Studio. We might use some of the other tools, but why do I need to learn yet another language or yet another tool? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about what Commandlets are. I'm going to talk about getting a module so that we can get a bunch of Commandlets and what a module is. I'm going to start with a basic script, and we're going to build up with that. We're going to use an array. We're going to talk a little bit about file I/O, text versus JSON. Build this up to kind of a final script. All these scripts, for your information, are available on GitHub. Please feel free to download them. If you download them prior to today, great. You can follow along at home. If not, you can hopefully download them and maybe try them out later. But please do go out there and check them out. So first of all, why PowerShell? Well, automation. I'm a consultant. My clients pay me to fix things and not to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm sure in your business, your bosses don't want to have you keep doing the same thing over and over again. They'd like you to automate things. So anytime you need to do something more than once, let's automate it. Or if you need to do it against multiple servers, again, let's automate. Scripts can run on Windows or Linux. Little caveat here, most of the scripts I'm going to show today can be run on Windows or on Linux. A few of them, and I will try to call them out, can only run on Windows, and I'll explain why. But most of these can run in either environment. So if you came to SQL Server from Linux, I'm giving you a powerful set of tools to be able to control SQL Server and interact with SQL Server. In addition, PowerShell is agnostic in terms of where SQL Server is running. If SQL Server is running on Windows, these scripts will work. If SQL Server is running on Linux, these scripts will work. So PowerShell really gives us a control regardless of the environment that we're in. We can also simplify otherwise complex tasks, and I'm going to show some examples of this. But a good example is, your CFO wants a monthly report run out of the finance database, and you could go into SSRS or SIS and create a whole workflow or a monthly report and do all that. Or you can do something like this literally in a few lines of PowerShell. If you really wanted to and wanted to make a bit obtuse, you could do it in one line, but we'll probably be able to do it in 3 or 4 lines. And we've just made what's an otherwise complex task a really simple task that we can scale and add as needed. So let's talk a little bit about commandlets. What is a commandlet? A commandlet is basically a SQL Server command. History behind why it's called commandlet, but basically it helps, among other things, when you Google things, you can find PowerShell commandlet. It will show these. Commandlets have a verb-noun syntax. So you see here we have get service. Below that we have get help. I'll talk about some of these commandlets. But what do? Well, rather than talk about them, let me jump into our first demo. So bear with me here as I jump into our first demo here and find my examples here. So first example is get service example. So I'm going to clear the screen here, and I'm just going to run just the commandlet by itself without any other information here. And you'll see all this scroll by. These are all the command services currently running on my desktop here where I'm recording this from. I can see I've got Hyper-V services, got the compute service started, but some of the others stopped. I've got this running at SQL Server. A lot of good information. But let's be fair, we're DBAs. We really don't care if Xbox live game save is running or not running or anything like that. We care about SQL Server. So I'm going to do a little magic here and show you what we can do with this with just one line. I've just looked at all the SQL Server services running on my desktop. SQL Server is running, we can see that right here. SQL Browser is stopped, SQL Agent is stopped, and this other 2 services, they're also running. Now I'm running SQL Express, so I expect that to be stopped on my box here. But if I'm running a production server, I probably want SQL Agent running, so I could have a job that makes sure these things are running, goes out and gets me information, sends me an email and an alert. It's not running. Now, one of the most powerful commandlets that you'll use, or one of the most useful, I should say, is get help. Again, it's pretty obvious. You got the verb, noun, get help. Don't have to explain that too much, but if we just run get help, we'll see it scrolls by fairly quickly, but there's a bunch of help here, how we can update it, a short description, a long one, how we can, get help. Okay, wait, right here, get help with commandlet name. That's telling us that we can get more information about a specific command. Here's some other examples that we can use, things like that. But let's take advantage of that one that they give, which is get help, get service. So now we're saying, hey, get help. I want help on the get service commandlet. And now I'm seeing a lot more information than I saw before. A name, quick synopsis, what the syntax is. Okay, I could get name on a specific one if I wanted. Computer name. Huh, that's kind of interesting. I can run this against another computer. We'll show that in just a second. Now, you notice it has this exclude string or include string. I could have used that instead of the where object up above, but I didn't. I wanted to demonstrate a couple of commandlets here, so hence the where object. And by the way, I realize where is not a verb, but if we treat it as a verb, it still kind of works there. Talks about some other links. Oh look, I've got a start service, a stop service, so I can start and stop services from the command line. This is very useful. But let's look at that computer name example for a second here. So Gauge is my Surface Pro. It's running about 2 feet to my right here. It's a Surface Pro. I use it for my demos when I travel. I want to see what's running on it. Do I have SQL Server on there? Well, lo and behold, I do. Notice I've said, hey, run it against Surface Pro, not against my desktop, and find me what is running. Now the Surface Pro is running SQL Developers Edition, so in this case, Agent is running. So I can see the difference in that. Now, I mentioned Get Help. I do want to show an example of Get Help that is even more useful because this, Get Service, if I looked up there, it talked about examples, but didn't really show anything like that. So let's see what happens. And this, by the way, is one of those that will really only run in a Windows environment because it pops up this nice GUI screen, which hopefully you can see that. It talks about all the different parameters that it can take. Are they required? They're not required? Is there default value? Information like that. Very, very useful stuff. And can we pipeline stuff in? We'll talk about that in a little bit. What the syntax is, input, output, notes. Okay, we'll talk about this alias later. But examples. Oh, wait. This is useful. This shows me all the examples I can use to find stuff. And notice, this sort of, we're going to talk about this in a second. But if we want to, and I'm going to expand this up a bit, we can see a lot of really useful stuff with Get Help and just adding the parameter show window. So I want you to keep that tucked in back ahead. I use Get Help a lot. There are at this point, I believe, over 5,000 PowerShell commandlets. And by the way, vendors can add their own commands through packages or through modules. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I want you to understand that we're talking a lot about commandlets because that's what powers SQL Server. So go back here for a second, talk about that. But I want to talk about something very important here. And this is fundamental. PowerShell is not command batch. You cannot just treat it as, oh, it's the batch language on steroids with a few extra commands. It's not. It's far more powerful than that. As I mentioned, there's something like 5,000 commandlets. For Linux folks, it is not bash. And the reason I say this is because batch and bash are string or file oriented, depending on how you look at it and what you're doing. They're not object oriented. We're dealing with objects in PowerShell. And I have a fellow DBA. She works a lot with Linux and Oracle and now SQL Server, of course. She's a huge bash fan. She's not a fan of PowerShell, doesn't like objects. But again, that's her environment. For me, I've become a real fan of objects. And I say this because I want you to understand going forward, we're going to be dealing with objects. And if you start writing some complex scripts and you get a little confused, why is it not working? You've got to kind of think it's an object, not a string, not a file that you're dealing with. That said, what is a file? A file is a specific type of object. So let me go back here for a second, go back to this slide, and we talked about this thing here where we were able to go this is basically the properties of the object, and we're going to look at this. What is this here? So we'll go back here. We talked about this briefly. This is the pipe symbol. This is basically taking the output from this commandlet, which again was output, getting a bunch of objects, pipe it into this commandlet, and let's see what happens. So we're going to pipe that in there. Boom, we suddenly see that we have a bunch of properties and methods, things that we can do. We can look at, can we stop it? Is that a Boolean? What type of startup? Is it automatic? Is it automatically delay? Is it manual? Maybe it's disabled. Why is this thing not running? I look at, oh, someone said it's disabled. I can't start it. And I have some other things I can start and stop there. So this is the object. This does not necessarily mean that this commandlet can do that, but the object put out by this, I can tell it to start and stop. So I very much want you to think about that. But notice when we look at the output of this, it will only show us the three most critical properties that it thinks we want to see. We can see others. We'll talk about that in just a minute here. So I want to take a detour into SQL Objects because, again, we are looking and thinking about objects here. And SQL Server, PowerShell treats it as just one really big object. So let's go in here again to our examples, and we're going to find, bear with me while I find it, this object here. So the first thing we're going to do is this really kind of funky line here. And this is a couple of things. So in SQL Server, in PowerShell, our variables begin with a $sign. And this is a very specific variable. ENV, we should be thinking environment. And then we should be thinking home drive. Well, that's probably my home drive. And if I take a look at that, notice down here I get the C:, just as I expect. And then I want environment home path, right? And I'm going to map here. So I want to take all this, and I'm going to set that to my demo dir. Oops. And then pretty easily, I'm just going to change directory to demo dir. Nothing fancy about that. Looks pretty simple. Looks just like we're in command shell so far. Or if we're in Linux, we would use something very similar. Don't worry about what this command here does for a second, but I'm going to import a module. It's imported, it's done. And now get PS drive. Well, we know, again, verb, noun, so we're getting something. We're getting PowerShell drive. Let's take a look at what that gets. Looks a lot like a normal directory listing, but it's a little different. It's got this name, used, free, alias. Okay, not sure what that is. That's a little different. Okay, C drive, root, and oh, here's where I am currently, and certificate, and the D drive. Okay, that's pretty good, but environment function, that's a little different. Don't know about that. And, well, this looks like registry stuff. In fact, it says registry, and look, the provider is the registry. Again, PowerShell is treating the registry as an object, which means we could do things directly on the registry. Not the focus of this, because we're DBAs, we want to deal with SQL Server. But we keep looking, we get down here, and we see this SQL Server object. And the provider is SQL Server. Well, that was the module that we imported, so what can we do with that? Let's try a few things. Well, let's set location. I'll explain this in a moment, but we're going to set location. And notice my command prompt now is basically, instead of a C:, it's SQL Server : SQL Server gauge. Again, gauge is my Service Pro sitting 2 feet to my right, and default. Well, that's really different. Well, we're going to do another PowerShell command, like get child item. Whoa, get power. I'm looking at all the databases. Again, PowerShell is treating my SQL Server as an object. Object has properties, it has members. In this case, I've got my databases. So again, we can assign objects to a variable. And now I want to see all my databases that are in simple mode. Pretty useful, I would say. Again, we're saying take the output from databases, which when we just put it by itself, it's taking that, pipe it into the where object, same thing. And these braces here are basically a PowerShell script block. Basically, execute this stuff within this block before you do anything else. And this $_ basically saying take the last variable object that you passed in and do something with it. In this case, take the property recovery model and show me only when it's equal to simple. Well, here's all my databases in simple recovery mode. And again, these are some demo databases that I set up on Gauge for other demos. Pretty useful. I could do the same thing. I could look at my full databases, whatever I want here. So again, I'm going to take the database, I'm going to pass that into get member because I really want to know what all these properties are. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Now notice, if you really want to get detailed, some of these are applying to databases, some applying to the server, stuff like that. But there's some useful stuff here. I can look at users, I could look at views, I can look at triggers, I can look at tables, I can look at, scroll up, I can look at more stuff about the databases. This is starting to get really useful. And I have not, if you noticed, I haven't typed any T-SQL yet. So I'm curious, I want to know, hey, what file groups are my databases on? Pretty straightforward. Again, take the database object, pipe it into this commandlet called select object, which is basically, hey, out of the object you just gave me, I only want the following properties. I want the name and I want the file groups. Pretty straightforward. So I can see that AdventureWorks 2014 is on index group and primary, and worldwide importers, oh look, that's got an in-memory data file group. That's kind of useful. All the rest are pretty simple. They just have a primary file group. Not going to think twice about that. Again, I've not written a line of T-SQL yet, and I've started to get some real interesting information about this. So let's change directories. That should give you pause for a second. And let's take a look at these directories, and we're going to go down here and we're going to list them, and I'm looking at the tables in my database. I'm doing an ls, or I could do a dir. That's pretty powerful. Now, I want to step back for a second and introduce you to the concept of an alias. Notice dir and ls did the same thing. So did get child item. So if I say get alias, if I can type here, and I just type dir, it tells me basically dir is an alias for get child item. So for your Windows folks there, you don't have to type out get child item every single time. You just type dir. But it is not quite the same thing. I can't do an order by date, for example, because that's command syntax. I'd have to do this a little differently. Or if I'm a Linux guru, I can type ls, same thing. And again, we look at the alias, we can see ls-get child item. So, and finally another one, just you'll see this with a lot of commandlets. They do have 3-letter character versions of that, which can be pretty useful. GCI is a shortcut for get child item. So all those are the same thing, but let's take a look at, now I'm going to set up my tables, and I want to find all the tables that have the schema DBO. Let's scroll down, and just very quickly, don't worry too much about the syntax here. Oh, there's my 3 tables, there's the row count of the tables. Oh good, there's no rows in error log, I must be doing something right. So again, at this point, I've done a lot of stuff within SQL Server without writing a single line of T-SQL. Very powerful. It's treating SQL Server as an alias. That said, one of the drawbacks that we have here is you're probably already thinking, but Greg, what about, how does that work? And it works basically because I can validate in my domain against my Gauge database because my user is administered on the Gauge database, and that works. Notice I didn't have to put in a user ID or a password because, again, I had domain validation. This is a problem in most Linux environments. Unless you've set up Samba and all that and jump through those hoops, which I'm not going to get into today, this won't work in a strictly Linux environment. I'll give you that caveat up front, but it is useful to know, and my point here was to get you thinking about SQL Server as an object and to think about PowerShell using objects in general. So that said, let's move on to modules. I mentioned modules before. Module is basically a collection of commandlets that vendors put together and put in the right location, kind of behind the scenes, that will allow you to run the commandlets within that module. So install modules, basically telling PowerShell, hey, go out, I believe it's on GitHub, get the SQL Server module, download it, and allow Clobber is basically, if it's the first time you've downloaded it, no problem, just install it. If it's the second time, and this is a newer version, overwrite the old one. Ignore any warnings or error messages, just go ahead and do it. You can do this on your desktop environment. Before you do it on a server environment, you might want to check, make sure that's okay. Generally, this is what I do, but every once in a while, for compatibility reasons or other things, you might need to do something different here. I'm not going to get into that again. That's kind of an advanced topic here. So, done that, installed SQL Server, and that's what let me, this import module is what let me get this provider installed so that I could see the SQL Server objects. So, very useful, and again, I can look at SQL Server on other machines in my network if I wanted to. Don't want to do that. My main server here has production data for customers, so I can't really show you that one. But anyway, so moving forward, we need a bunch of SQL servers for these demos. And this is where, if you download stuff beforehand, you might have been able to set this up. At this point, probably don't have time to follow along, but bear with me. I'm going to use Docker. I've never used Docker before. Started bringing this demo. I'm like, well, I really could use a couple SQL servers. I could spin up Hyper-V and that get complex and install and everything like that. Or I could use Docker. And I just, by the way, saw a presentation on Kubernetes at the Hampton Roads SQL Server User Group on Wednesday night a couple weeks ago. That was really useful, really powerful. I'm probably going to start using that in the future. But I'm going to use Docker today because it's quick and easy, and because, again, I can use PowerShell to do this. So let's talk about that. Long script. I'll show you the script in a second. But basically, this script here is, with one or two changes that I made to the actual script, is going to allow me to spin up a bunch of SQL servers within Docker. So let's do that. Spin up SQL Server containers. And let me talk about this. Again, we set out a demo dir, port number, looks familiar. How many SQL servers do I want? I'm not greedy. 4 is going to be enough. I don't need more than that. So let's see what happens at this point. But I want to do something a little tricky here. I talked about arrays. This is basically the syntax for an explicit array, just the numbers 1 and 2, and I'm going to set that to the variable Sql 2017 or ver 2017. This little block here is something interesting. I want to talk about this. One caveat that some people have, or concern they have when running scripts and building scripts is, well, what about passwords? And again, if I'm running in an Active Directory domain and I'm a administrator on that server, no problem. I can just run these scripts and they should run transparently. However, like I say, these are Linux machines. I am going to have to worry about actually logging into the Linux machine, and when I set it up, it wants an SA password. But I'm smart. I don't want to have that SA password in clear text. So there's a method using PowerShell where basically you can take a string, convert it to what they call a string, and put that out as an encrypted string on the disk. And this is a typical model I use. I'm putting my demo directory, putting the name cred underscore SA underscore that, and then just using my username dot text. Now, one of the things that you may notice is PowerShell is very good about expanding variable names straight into strings. I don't have to concatenate or anything like that. It's going to write this exactly as I would expect. And if I look here, I'm going to see this file I created a couple weeks ago. It's right there. And this is storing the SQL Server password. No, that is not the SQL Server password. That is the encrypted string for it. What's nice about this is it encrypts it based on a key specific to that user, which means I can roll this exact same script out to 5 different people. They can create the encrypted string, and each encrypted string is going to be unique to them. Why is this important? This is important because if a domain administrator comes along and says, oh, I'm going to just hop on Greg's box and I'm going to see what scripts he has. Oh, look, there's a script for SQL Server. Oh, look, there's SA password. Not going to happen. They would actually have to hack my account to get in. And let's put it this way. If they've hacked my account at that point, we've already got other issues. So this is a really nifty way of having secure strings on this. I have written an article. I'm going to push it. It's at Redgate. Look it up under the symbol talk, but I talk about using secure strings in that way. So now keep in mind, I can and I actually do expose that secure string when I run this, but only I can see this. Nobody else running is going to see my secure string, and I can't see anybody else's secure string. Now this is pretty simple. I'm just basically going to say loop from 1 up to 4. And we saw this before, but I didn't comment on it. PowerShell designers decided, rather than use equal sign or greater than, less than, stuff like that, to use these 2 or 3 letter what do we call it? Codes, abbreviations for comparisons. So this is actually less or equal than. LT would be simply less than. Nice thing about this is you never have to worry about, oops, I typed an equal sign. Is that a comparison or is that an assignment? It really kind of solves that issue. I still sometimes I start to type equals and wonder why my thing's breaking down, so I have to do -LE. We'll see this a few more times in here. I'm going to give a name to each Docker container, basically of SQL Demo 1, SQL Demo 2, so on and so forth. Increment my port number. Anybody who grew up learning the C language will recognize that syntax. And then I'm basically going to take my port number and do stuff with it. Now, in this case, I do want to concatenate it, but I want to concatenate the string, not the value. Otherwise, it would try to add this, and that gets messy. And notice we've got that. It's not like it is a comparison operator, but in this case, in. That's pretty straightforward. So what I'm saying here is, if my variable is within my array, in this case 1 or 2, run this command. Otherwise, run this one. Obviously, I can make it do whatever I want. But what this is doing is this is taking and basically going to spin up a Docker container running SQL Server 2017, the latest, and this is going to run SQL Server 2019 and run the latest. And when we get done, we're just going to show what Docker containers are running. Pretty straightforward. So 24 lines. Some of these are actually redundant. I could reduce them if I wanted to, but let's run this and see how long it takes to run. So remember, I'm spinning up 4 fully functional SQL Server instances. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not sure why that 4th one's not coming up. Usually it's a little faster than that, but it should come. Okay, it took a little longer there. But even still, with that extra delay, I spun up 4 fully functional SQL servers in 11 seconds. That's pretty powerful when you stop to think about it. If I had to do this, the old-fashioned way, I would have had to start an hour before this talk, and I'd still be hoping that they had finished installing. And 2 of them are SQL 2017 and 2 are 2019. Again, if I wanted to spin up more, I could do that. I mentioned this port mapping. Basically, that's basically saying at my desktop, I can't use 1433 because I'm running an instance there. So these will basically be running as instances on those ports, and they'll just map into 1433 within that instance. There's the name. Pretty powerful. So as you can see, in 24 lines of PowerShell, I just spun up 4 SQL instances. Really kind of powerful. Like I say, I saw this on Kubernetes. I'm going to start playing with that. I could do something similar and spin up actual failover redundant clusters and nodes and all that. That would be basically bomb-proof with about 4 or 5 more lines of code and a YAML file. Again, we're talking very powerful stuff that PowerShell can let us do. So now we're going to actually do some actual SQL queries. And again, we're going to use that trick to get our password out, and we're just going to get a select of databases from this. So where's our next? We're just going to run this. Kind of interesting. We see our 4 databases, but before we do that, I want to talk about, look at all these pockets that we have. We can look at, is ANSI null on, is ANSI default on, everything like that. Not very useful stuff here. And honestly, there's the system database. I want a couple more databases, so I'm going to add another couple databases here and show you how simple it is. And again, here we get our SA password, start with a port. We're going to create a database called passdemo1, passdemo2, depending on what machine it's on. We're going to make sure it's in recovery full mode. We're going to create a login specific to that box. And in this case, I'm not going to really hide the password. It's fine for this demo. And we're going to make that account a sysadmin. And then we're going to create a second database on there because our dev folks say, hey, we need one in compatibility level 120. We're going to do that. So again, across 4 instances, we're going to create 2 databases, a login, and assign a role for that login. So hold on to your hats, see how long this takes. Should not take very long, but again, think if we had to log into each machine manually, that might take some time. So boom, what have we just done? Again, created 2 databases on each of 4 instances, so a total of 8 databases, a log on each instance, and assigned a role for that login. Pretty simple. And again, I didn't have to use SSMS to get into the box, go into the GUI, cut paste, and all that fun stuff. I could simply run this as a single script. So now again, if we look at our simple database one, we see even more stuff now. We see the database we created, DBID 6, DBID 5, but that's kind of messy. I don't want to look at that. So again, we're going to get it to a variable, and again, we're dealing with objects. So we'll run this. We store it as a database, is a variable in databases. Let's write that out. That wasn't what I expected. What happened there? Again, think about objects. We're dealing with objects for our databases. So basically saying, hey, I've got an object here. It's a data row. It's a data row object with a data row attached to it. I don't know what you want me to do with that, so I'm just going to tell you what I got here. So now I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to take that whole thing and I'm going to write it out. I'm going to pipe it into this thing called format table and then outstring it. Just a fancy way of saying, hey, make this kind of neat and show me some information. And again, okay, I got master, I got database ID. Owner said, don't worry about that. That's just a PowerShell has a little trouble displaying that quickly. The creation date, created these today. The time's a little off because of the way it's spun up to Linux, but not an issue for us. Compatibility level, notice we got 140 and 120. Collation name, okay, so it showed us some properties, but it didn't show us all of them. What if we really want to see all of them? Again, all this up to now will work on Linux. It is working against Linux, and I'm running on Windows, but I could also run the script on Linux. At this point now, if I really wanted to run this one, I have to be on a Windows box because, again, I'm going to get this nice graphical interface. And again, look, now I can see all those properties. That's just a lot of stuff. Now imagine we had 50 databases in here. We wanted to kind of narrow things down. So I'm going to say, you know what? I only want to look at user database. I don't care about the, make that greater than or equal to. I don't care about the system databases because those are pointless. I know they exist. So I'm going to add this criteria. And you know what? I really care about the compatibility level. So I'm going to add that criteria level. And in this case, I want it less than or equal to 30. Let's see. 140. Yes, I was right. 130. Sorry. There's my one database I created with compatibility level of 120. So again, I use the out-grid view a lot when I'm debugging scripts of, hey, I kind of want to narrow down what I'm looking at, stuff like that. Again, for Linux folks, you can be a little limited here, but still pretty powerful for looking at stuff like that. So, about that. Well, what else can we do? Well, we used select objects before. I want to look at, I don't want this big screen. That's more information I want, too wide and everything like that. I want just a small bit of it. There we go. Now I'm looking at a much smaller list of it, compatibility level, collation name. Great. But you know what? That happens to be in database ID order. Keep in mind, without a select statement or order by statement in my select, I could get whatever order. It just happens to be the order I created them. I don't want that. I want them alphabetically because, you know, that's the way I want them. So I'm going to basically select that object. I'm going to sort it based on the name, pass it through, and pass it to right host. And now if you notice, I've got master, model, must be pass demo 1, pass demo 120, and temp DB. So it sorted it and printed it out that way. And finally, I really only care about all the databases that have lower than compatibility level 140 because, you know, I need to upgrade them or something like that. And again, I'm using this example to show that once I have an object, I can manipulate it in a multitude of ways, get the compatibility level, select the object, get the collation name wherever. No, honestly, I'd probably flip this around, put this sort object at the end, but either way, this works. Gets me the thing I know that I have one database and its compatibility level is 120. Maybe I need to look at updating that database. So we've done that. I want to show one last thing because, again, I used an example before. I didn't talk about it, but we're going to look at this. And again, we're just going to look at the databases on one instance. Select start from sys databases, and this for each. So here we have a collection of objects. We want just a simple object, and we want to look at the name of that. So again, we're looking at that property of that object. Keep in mind here that we do have only 6 databases. If we had 100 databases, we might want to filter that, and we're only looking at one server here. So now we probably want to start thinking about, well, but Greg, I want to automate this. I want to put this against multiple servers. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So these are kind of silly examples I wanted to introduce you to PowerShell, but now I want to get into actual examples where I think it's going to be a little more useful for you. So, common thing. Auditors come in, they say, hey, we want to see all the logins of your database. Okay, that's a fair question. And if I got one login or one database, excuse me, I would probably just script it out and do a select star from this and print it out, copy and paste it. 2 or 3, I might do the same thing. I got 4 here. That's starting to get a little unwieldy. I don't want to have to go into each one individually. And if I have 100 databases, I certainly do not want to do this by hand. I want to automate this. So I also want to put this out to a file because I know the auditor, most auditors like Excel files or at the very least a CSV file that they can do something with. So I already have this file here in the database because I've run this before. So I want to get rid of that one. So again, first thing I'm going to do is test path and this demo dir. By the way, normally I would not do that, but I know this is going to work here. So I'm going to test path and I'm going to remove that item. So again, test the path, remove item. Pretty straightforward what I'm doing here. Now I've got an array of instances. Pretty useful. Those are all the instances I created. And I'm just going to go through here and for each one I'm going to run this SQL command, which is basically show me all the logins where they're not disabled and write out the host and put it into the file. So let's run that and then I'm going to explain another detail here. Okay, 1434 has the following SQL service enabled, SA, SA1. Okay, that's good. That's what I figured. We created with SA and we added these, so that's what we expect. As you recall, I mentioned how SQL Server will expand a variable into a string when it can. So like instance here, it can expand in as instance. But whenever you're dealing with a property, you kind of have to expand it twice. So we put it within the parentheses and put another $ around it. Understand there's other ways of doing this. This is the way I do it. It comes naturally to me. So that prints out to the screen, but we want to convert this into a CSV file that our auditor can look at. Now, that's what it looks like. Not the neatest thing. I'd probably do a little work to clean this up a bit. But notice, SA is disabled. It's set to false, so SA is enabled right now. And we'll see what the auditor says about that. Now, meanwhile, I've decided I want to go out to lunch. I've got a hot date. I want to see some friends, whatever. And the auditor comes back and says, no, this is not acceptable. You need to disable SA across all of your servers. And you're thinking, oh God, I got 100 servers out there. There goes my lunch and maybe goes my dinner. Wait a second. I've got PowerShell. I can do this really easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a quick PowerShell script. Fortunately, I've already written one. And I'm going to go in and disable them. Again, my instances. Now in this one though, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to deal with the fact that what happens if SA is already secured. I can't go in and alter anything. So I'm going to run my secondary SA account, the one that I created in my script earlier. And I'm simply going to use that here. And again, I'm not too worried about security because I'm going to delete the script as soon as I'm done. And I'm just going to do an alter login SA disabled. That's real quick and dirty. And again, so I'll look at it. Well, I've got 4 servers here, but maybe I have 100 servers. Let's run this, see what it takes. Boom. I just logged into my 4 servers and I disabled the SA password. I can still make my lunch. I'm happy. Of course, not quite. The auditor is a little like, that should have taken long. I don't believe you. You got to prove it to me. I'm like, okay, fine. So I put together another script. And again, I'm going to not hard code, or I am going to hard code the password in there again. I would do this differently, but for demo purposes, I think. And this time I'm going to call it logins fixed, because I really want to drive home the point that I fix these logins. So I'm going to remove the old one if it exists, go through and basically, again, just select it. But this time I have to show that SA was disabled. So, but I don't want all those other system accounts in there, so I'm going to just ignore those for a minute. I'm going to write it out, and then I'm going to create this text file for them. And then, because I really want to get to lunch, I'm going to mail it to them. So let's do this first. Run this portion of it. Boom, and notice hey, it still has those logins. We're not saying they're enabled, just says the logins. Let's take a look at our login fixed CSV one here. And we can see that SA now says true. Is disabled is true. SA1 is still false because that's how we logged in. So we've just shown that, hey, we disabled SA across all these servers. Good to go. Stop bugging me. I'm going to go get lunch. But we really don't want to deal with the auditor anymore. So we're going to just send them this mail message. Boom, done. And again, what have we done? Another commandlet, verb, noun, send mail message. Give it a mail server, who it's from, who it's to. In this case, it's just a demo. What the subject is, the body, and I'm going to add in that attachment that I sent there. Pretty useful stuff. And I could run this, and I could even, by the way, now make this a scheduled task that runs once a day. So every day, auditor comes and says, hey, anybody use those SA passwords? They still say, yep, here you go, and get that mail out. I mentioned at the beginning of my talk here how we could automate things and how we could basically send a report in one line. Okay, so we got 19 lines here. I lied a little bit, but if you think about it, some of those lines are redundant. I really could make this a lot simpler if I wanted to, or a lot more compact. But this is pretty powerful stuff. And again, this is going to run on Windows or on Linux. There's nothing in here that is specific to Windows. I can run this on a Linux box as long as I have PowerShell core installed and I've installed the SQL Server module. So we're doing pretty well there. But we've decided we really like this. We want to get a little more advanced. We need to do a little more. So let me show you something first here that I've done and run through here for a second. So the first thing I did is I've got this instances.txt file, and basically what's it show me? Well, I got 4 instances. This is kind of nice. Got this JSON file, that's what it looks like. Now this is what starts to get interesting. Now I'm looking at elements of that JSON file. Servers, server name, environment, it's a dev environment, version is SQL 2017, and here's a prod environment, again SQL Server 2017, so on and so forth. But that's not useful to me. I need to get that into a form that I can do something with. And this is just a raw format. If I convert it from JSON, so again, get content, which is basically read this file from this path. Notice this join path. I said in the last script, just appending file names to paths is a bad idea. Join path is the correct way of doing this because, again, in my example previously, here, something like that, I sort of like that. It's probably not going to run under Linux. I probably have to deal with my slashes going in the other direction. But here, the join path will handle that. And maybe I've got an extra slash in a demo here. I put a slash like that or something in. So join path is the correct way of doing that. So look at that. So I'm taking that, and here I'm piping the results of that get content into convert from JSON, and then assigning the whole thing to this instance's JSON. And when I look at that, and I write it out, which is what I'm doing here, hey, now I've got this nice thing, and it almost looks like a set of objects. And I'm going to do something with that. I'm going to spend the rest of the demo on just this, and how we can use this to do some demos. So that auditor is still breathing down my neck. They think they've got things going, and they really want to just make sure everything's good. So they want to know the last time someone logged into these instances. So again, I'm just going to go through. I'm going to use my insecure password, run through, boom. And I know the last time someone logged in to SA was this time, SA1 was that time, what the instance was, great. And I could then spit this out to the auditor and make them happy. They can look at all this and say, okay, that's good. And again, I could automate this so that once a day I can get this report and say, okay, when's the last time the SA person logged in? In my largest client, the SA is never allowed to log in. But there's some environments where the SA is disabled, but to run certain scripts, they enable the SA, run script, disable it, things like that. This will let me know that, hey, is someone disabling, or I should say re-enabling SA so they can run scripts. And notice what I did here, though, is I looked at the instances. And I used that instance value in here. So again, just take a quick look at that instance. That's all it contains. Real simple. What I want you to think about here is, again, this is a demo. This is production. I might have a UNC share someplace where, or an NFS mount, where I share all these, this instance.txt file. This means if I've got 4 or 5 DBAs, I don't have to tell them, oh, get the latest file. Oh, the latest file is here. Make sure you upload the latest file. No, I have the script point to a centralized location, and I get it there. I've added a server. I just update my instances.txt. If I remove a server, I update my instance.txt and take that server out. Very, very useful way of controlling what servers that I can operate my scripts on. But this is a quick and dirty way to do this. I'm going to recommend a better way of doing this. And now we want to look at, hey, when a login is going to expire. I've been going through this with one of my clients. They have rules that some logins disable 90 days, some login 365 days, how close are they logging in or disabling, stuff like that. So we need to look at this and see what this setup is. But I've decided to use this serverless JSON file this time. And I'll explain why in just a second. We're going to run a SQL server here, query as password change from just logins, look at the properties, look at the look back dates and everything like that. And again, we're going to ignore anything that's got the pound in there, and if it's disabled, we don't really care. So now notice here, again, this is kind of nice. It looks kind of like our login up here, but it's showing the server. That's good. The environment, well, where did that come from? We'll come back to that. And well, since SA is disabled, we don't care about that. We're only going to show SA1. And the password was changed today when we created the account. So we got, in this case, 180 days before we have to change that account. We're doing quite well there. But I use the serverless.json file because now what I can do is I can actually embed the element environment within my query, just as shows up as a string. One thing that PowerShell can do is the way it handles strings. You can use single quotes or double quotes, but it's nice because if you're using double quotes, again, any variable inside will expand, but again, because I'm dealing with a property of a variable, I have to then put that within things. And I put that in single quotes, that just basically gets embedded as a string, so that gives me the server name. Here it gives me the environment name, and I'm good to go. I get the information, boom. And again, I have a script similar to this that I can run against a dozen SQL servers once a month just by keeping my serverless.json updated and show me what environment everything's in. I don't have to set up a job on each SQL server to send me 5 different emails or anything like that. I have one job in one location. That's pretty powerful to do that. So that's all good, but let's talk about where this has become very helpful for me and maybe helpful for you, and that's in deploying code. So let me find that one, deploy SQL file. Now, before anybody stops this, but Greg, you can use Puppet, you can use the other tools. I agree. I'm not going to besmirch any of those tools. I mention this because my largest client won't let me. I know some other DBAs who we get together and we gripe and say, yeah, this would be a whole lot easier. Just let me install this, install that. And also, this is a good demo example of what we can do. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about here are parameters. We haven't used these in our scripts before, but we've seen commandlets that had parameters. That's how we told the commandlet what we wanted to do. Parameters let us pass information into our own scripts. And by the way, you notice I called this deploy SQL file, so again, I'm using it as a verb noun. It's basically going to be treated like a commandlet. And in this case, I made all my parameters mandatory. The environment is mandatory, SQL version is mandatory, some of these things. So if I try to run this without actually providing anything, the first thing it's going to do is say, hey, Greg, you need to provide an environment. Okay, I'm going to say prod, I need to provide a SQL version, so on and so forth. So it will not let me run this without providing those mandatory parameters. the parameter is not mandatory, it will not prompt me for it. Now on top of that, this is pretty intelligent because it will only allow certain values for some of the parameters. Now a question I get asked a lot is, what tool do I like for editing PowerShell? It depends. Favorite SQL DBA answer. For a lot of stuff, I still use PowerShell ISC for one really useful reason. If you're on Linux, you're probably going to use Vim. It's up to you. A lot of people are using Visual Code now on Windows. That's great. No problem with that. But one thing that ISC does, not every editor does, in fact most of them don't, is it will help you prompt. So I type that. Oh look, as soon as I hit the minus sign there, or the dash, it prompts me for the environment. Pretty cool. I know and it knows that because it's mandatory. It's one of the things. As soon as I prompt that, notice it's asking for dev or prod. And again, this is handy because this validates that, says it must be one of those. So if I say, well, you know, I really want the UAT environment, I don't care what they say, I'm going to deploy to UAT first. I don't have a UAT environment. It will not validate on that. It will say, nope, doesn't belong there. But this is also useful because I don't want one of my DBAs coming along and saying, well, I want the production environment. No, we've called a production environment prod because it's less typing and we like it that way. So again, we can force what parameters we will and will not accept. Now obviously for the database name, I don't have that because every server is going to have a different database, set of databases on it, and my patch file is always going to change. So let's take a demo here, and this is one of the few times I'm going to cut and paste from another window that you can't see. But I don't want to type in the demo because I'm going to make mistakes. I want to deploy this script to my model database. Who is active? Most of us are familiar with it. If not, go check it out. Very useful tool. And I want it in the model databases. That way, whenever I create a new database, that stored procedure will be in the other databases. Most people don't know that about model, by the way, but it's a nice thing. But I want to deploy this to dev first. And I don't care what version of SQL Server I deploy it to. So I want to deploy it to my 2017 and 2019 instances. Hit enter, and notice it tells me it's deployed to 1434 in dev, and any of the following versions. That's great. Just what I want. Week later, day later, whatever, say, okay, that deployed without any issues. Let's deploy that to prod. I'm going to go in here, and again, the only option I have is dev or prod, deploy it. And notice this time now it's deployed to my prod databases, and I don't care what environment it's in. Pretty useful. But soon comes along a new table that we're going to add some new functionality to our servers that are running 2017. This is a product that only runs in 2017, so we're going to add this here. We're going to say what database we want it in, and we're going to run this patch file. Notice again, we're saying the dev environment, but now we're saying it can only be on our 2017 service. We do not want it on 1436, which is our 2019 server. Boom, it only deployed it to the one server. This is great, we're happy with that. We're going to, after a couple days, we're going to add it to our 2019 server. And again, because we know that server 2 in our database increments by the server name, we change that and deploy it there. And it should come back in a second. Oops, actually, this is a good example. Notice I said I was going to deploy to the pod environment. It's going to fail. I don't have error handling in here. We can add that in the next iteration, but we're going to actually say, hey, we need to go to our prod environment. And notice, which is 2017, so excuse me, this demo is, again, failing. I'm going to fail that. So we're going to, let's try this one last time. We want this in our prod 2017 environment. It deploys there just fine. Notice it would not let us deploy it to the wrong environment because that combination just doesn't exist. So these are some great examples of how we can use PowerShell to automate tasks. If we had 100 servers out there, we could put these all together in our JSON file and expand that JSON file. So that was our dive deep. Just showed that slide earlier, but it's a simple slide. You don't really need to see it. I don't think there's anything super special about it. And now we can look at, we're going to finish up real quick. I'm running out of time here. Please submit your feedback. It's very important to me. I do look at this. I want to hear from you. Very important. And finally, contact information at Strider Jim. If you do not use Twitter, please do. Hashtag SQL Help will get you lots of help. And GitHub started GDM. A couple of quick notes about me. I really appreciate this, and thank you for your time and effort. This was a great experience for me, and now we're going to the live Q&A session.